Marking its 40th anniversary in 2022, Blue Door is the largest emergency housing provider in York Region, providing life-saving support to children, youth, adults, seniors, and families at risk or experiencing homelessness. Along with offering emergency housing and housing retention support, in the past 2 years, Blue Door has expanded its service offering to further work toward preventing and ending homelessness through Inclusion, the first supportive housing program for 2 SLGBTQ+ youth in York Region. Construct, a social enterprise by Blue Door, providing supported skills training to help youth and adults break barriers to employment and secure meaningful careers in construction trades. And launching in 2022, a health hub which will include a nurse and in-reach system navigator to help people regain the health and well-being needed to secure and retain permanent housing. Join Blue Door's mission and become part of the solution by learning more at bluedoor.ca.
We at On the Way Home would like to acknowledge the original stewards of whose lands this podcast is recorded on. In York Region, we recognize we're on the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples, and that this is the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. And in Vancouver, we acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, whose presence on these lands continue to this day.
Welcome to On the Way Home, a podcast dedicated to the issues surrounding homelessness and the incredible experts making a difference in the lives of homeless people. Remember to subscribe to the podcast anywhere you're listening and share it with a friend.
Welcome to another episode of On the Way Home. I am your host, Michael Braithwaite from Blue Door, and I say this with a lot of enthusiasm and truth. As always, I am joined by not one, not two, but 3 amazing guests today to talk about a really, really cool program and initiative that they've been working on for the past year and a half. But before we get to our awesome guests, let's talk a little bit about your 2 organizations that are behind this pretty cool podcast that is a focus on everything from health to housing to mental health to employment social enterprises to preventing homelessness, to housing first, all those great ideas from around the world. They come to you through this On the Way Home podcast. And it's brought to you by the good folks at the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, and as well, my awesome organization, Blue Door. The Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness right now, they host the largest conference in North America. And if you sign up, I believe before August, and this podcast will probably air before then, so if you're listening, sign up now. Not only is it the best conference you'll go to in this sector, but you'll get a bit of a discount. You get an early bird discount if you sign up now. And suppose you are a company or organization that really wants to get the word out to the sector, or has something to offer the sector, you also can look at sponsorship too. Like, there's no better way to reach the entire sector than through this conference, getting a booth there. And there's all sorts of opportunities for sponsorship. So check that out. And if you're a community that is saying, hey, what can we do in the battle to end homelessness? Become a Built for Zero community. And check that out. Go to CAH.ca. They do a ton of Built for Zero work, and they've had great success all over the country with all sorts of communities getting to or around functional zero and reducing homelessness, reducing veterans homelessness. So check out the work they're doing there. They could be of help to your community. Hey, what's happening at Blue Door? What is not happening at Blue Door right now? Tons going on. We have recently expanded into the region of Peel. So for those of you who don't know, so York Region is just above Toronto, 1.1 million people. That's our base of operations where we operate. A while back, our construction social enterprise construct veered over to the east, where we are now in Durham, and now that program has gone west, so all over the top of the GTA into Peel, which is pretty cool, and it is a partnership in the trades with Humber College, so some different trades there. So very cool stuff happening at Blue Door. We're looking to take that construct model, and if there's anyone across the country that says, hey, you know what, I really like that model, I'd love to launch a construction social enterprise where we're putting people into well-paid and meaningful work and bringing in revenue as a construction company for my organization to maybe help build housing and homelessness, prevent homelessness, reach out to us. At any time, you can reach out to me at michael.b@bluedoor.ca. If you have ideas about great guests, if you have questions about the guests, you want to reach out to a guest and follow up, you have great feedback about the podcast, reach out to me. Would love to hear it. But enough of that. Let's get to today's guest. So today we are joined by 3 different organizations and 3 different guests. I'm going to start with my colleague, Emmy Kelly. Now, Emmy is a veteran on this podcast. This is her second podcast. She actually came in and helped me out for one of the podcasts. She was a host with me. So she knows this. Now, the first time I ever had Emmy on, which is kind of crazy, I messed up her bio. You think, you've been working with her for 3 years. This is the person you probably know best that's come on the podcast, but I still managed to do that. I'm going to try not to do that today. And sometimes you think, wow, it really sounds like he's reading those bios. It's because I am, because I don't want to mess them up. So let's start with Emmy. So Emmy is our COO at Blue Door, where she has operationalized growth at the rate of 150% and works strategically to ensure visionary ideas are integrated and executed within the organization in a thoughtful, sustainable way. Yeah, that's well put, Emmy, well put. Under Emmy's guidance and leadership as COO, Blue Door has vastly expanded services for those experiencing homelessness and poverty, including innovative, population-specific support for 3 highly vulnerable and underserved populations of senior men, families, and 2S LGBTQ plus youth. And let me tell you, from working with Emmy, she does do it all and does it well. And man, tons of energy. And our organization has just taken off with her leadership. And she is joined by Adrienne Pacini. So Adrienne is the principal of strategic design at SHS Consulting, where she's launched the firm's housing innovation practice. Adrienne spends her time facilitating collaborative conversations, developing strategies for systems innovation in the housing sector. Over the past 9 years, she co-authored dozens of research papers and strategies for governments across Canada, nonprofit housing providers, and community agencies aimed at creating change in our housing and human services systems. Today, Adrienne leads a series of solutions labs, we're going to talk about one today, on creating new housing tenure models and realizing the right to housing in Canada. Let me tell you too about Adrienne at SHS, just from a personal note. The 3 organizations I've been with in this sector, we have always worked with Adrienne at SHS. They are known throughout the country as just great consultants. They know their stuff. Especially, listen, people listening in the sector, if you're applying to CMHC, it can get tricky. And SHS really knows their stuff. They know the programs, the solutions labs, and more. And so they are our go-to at Blue Door always for, hey, we have this opportunity. We love working with them. And they love this, and their passion shows. So much more than consulting. There's a ton of passion there. And finally, last but not least, a friend of the podcast. He's on for his second time. We do a lot of work with Josh and Joshua Benard. Listen, I reach out to Josh all the time just to say, I don't get this, or I need some help around these numbers, or it's just a brilliant guy. He is vice president at Habitat GTA Real Estate Development and a board member of the Community Affordable Housing Solutions. And that's another podcast altogether, but he's helped us with that as well. So after a number of years working in residential construction, Joshua Benard realized that he wanted to devote his career to the affordable housing space. This led him to become the founder of a program and program director of Sustainable Housing Initiative operating out of the Rural Development Network. He then turned his ideas into impact, growing the organization into a 15-member team that oversaw the development of multiple affordable housing projects worth over $80 million. Recognized in 2018 as one of Alberta's top 40 under 40, Joshua's creative problem-solving skills, relationship-focused work, and passion for making a difference led him to his job at Habitat for Humanity GTA in 2019. And we are so glad he's there. He's doing so much great work across the GTA and beyond. So all of you, welcome to On the Way Home. Now there's 3 people too, so they never know really when to answer, who's going to chat. We're going to try and get this right. For our first question, it's our standard question that we ask everyone who comes on the podcast. We're going to start with Adrienne, then we're going to go to Emmy, and we're going to finish with Josh. Kind of like, oh no, it was a little different than the intros, but that's how we're going to do it. Adrienne, Emmy, and Josh, what does home mean to you?
Sure, thanks. And thanks so much for having us today. I'm really excited about this. So for me, home is a place where I can be myself, where I know I have stability, but also where memories are made and where I can welcome people in to create memories with me.
Agreed. And I feel we There's so much emotional value to having a home. It's where you have your downtime, enjoy family. You can use your address for healthcare services, for your driver's license, for your basic needs. I feel we often focus on the emotional value of home, and that is so important. And one other piece that might tie into what we're talking about today is the future wealth and equity that is built through having a home.
To me, it's a basic human need, and as many of us discuss on a daily basis, a basic human right. Whether we're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs or just a housing first approach, it's clear that people everywhere need a house, a home to survive, live, and most importantly, thrive. And I think this is something that gets lost in the day-to-day conversation with government and regular people across, in communities across Canada, when we talk about what it means to not just what the word home means to us, but what does a home that we can afford mean?
Well said. And as I find a common theme throughout those answers, no one really mentions the physical structure about the four walls and a roof. It's much more than that. To all what everyone said, it really is that starting point, right? And that human need. If you say, what in life do you actually need versus want, housing's right there, right at the start. Quite often we talk about food banks and the use of food banks going up. Anyone who runs a food bank will say, it's not that we need more food banks, we need more affordable housing, because this is the result of people not being able to afford their housing. They're pouring everything into that, they can't afford food, right? So very, very important stuff. So good stuff. Now, listen, Adrienne mentioned Solutions Labs, or we mentioned that in her intro, Solutions Lab and the CMHC. So this group came together, and through a Solutions Lab, there's a project you call Dwell, right? And you received some funding to do that. So I'm hoping that you could tell me a little bit about this, and we're going to start with Emmy. How did this partnership come around for Dwell? What was your big idea or elevator pitch? Emmy, we'll start with you.
So I think the discussion started because Blue Door owns a site that we currently use for emergency housing that is highly underutilized. There's a lot of land, a very small building. And we started working with SHS and Habitat to make plans to increase the density on that piece of land. As we were working through it and we started going into the programmatic pieces of, who would be in this space, how would we manage it, we started thinking about how we wanted to offer more than just emergency housing on this site. Exposing ourselves in partnership with Habitat for Humanity and SHS, we started learning and understanding, the possibility models that were out there. So Habitat has some great models in existence to help build equity for those that they serve. And our challenge seemed to be that Blue Door serves very highly vulnerable individuals. And we see that there isn't really that same opportunity to start building equity when you're at that point in your life when you're experiencing homelessness. And in our discussions, we wanted to do something to change that. And so we started asking ourselves, I guess, the question of what is the way that we can help to build equity for our most vulnerable? And so essentially that became our elevator pitch, and it started with thinking about how can we make home ownership a reality for our most vulnerable? And then as we sort of went along this journey, that question morphed. And we started looking past just this particular site. We wanted to create a model that would be relevant to our most vulnerable, not just in our programs, but something that could be replicated for charities and nonprofits and organizations alike throughout Canada. And that's where our teams work together to come up with well.
Very cool. Adrienne, Josh, anything to add to that?
Yeah, maybe another way of thinking of it too for listeners who are part of the housing sector in Canada. So we all know that the conventional wisdom supports that traditional pathway of moving from maybe emergency housing to rental housing to permanent and home ownership. And so we came together, and when we first came together, we actually called this project Housing Journeys Reimagined. So as Emmy was saying, that was really our kind of inspiration for kind of reimagining that journey. And so we wanted to challenge that pathway along that housing continuum. And we were thinking, this could involve a new tenure model. It might involve a new finance model, or it might involve a new service model. It might involve all three of those together. But we started with that kind of big question, and in hopes of it scaling, as Emmy said, across the country.
So let's keep on that theme, Adrienne. I'm going to go to you. You kind of touched on it, but let's dive a little deeper into what was the problem you were actually trying to solve with the Solutions Lab?
Yeah, so I think everyone on this team at least would agree that, a great initiative starts with a great question. And so instead of starting with a really kind of embedded question of trying to make home ownership more affordable or more attainable to people of different incomes, which might lead us to, a new mortgage product or a new financial tool, we actually worked really hard to dispel our existing assumptions about what parts of home ownership are actually important to people. So was it actually about, legally owning the home that was important to people and having their name on title? Was it about living somewhere where they could modify their space? Or is it simply about living somewhere where you don't have to deal with a landlord, or where you can stay as long as you want? Or maybe it was something else that we didn't even think about. So something else that caught our attention too was that that Emmy was alluding to is that supportive housing often, but not always, but often assumes a rental tenure. And we had a mandate in this project to create a new tenure model that would work for Blue Door, the people that Blue Door serves. So we knew that there would probably be a support service component. So that, with all of that led us to our challenge question, which get ready for it because it's a bit wordy, but how might we disrupt the current housing continuum journey, which many of us visualize as that linear path, to create opportunities for individuals experiencing homelessness to transition from shelters to a place that offers permanence and stability, the opportunity to build equity, a sense of pride and responsibility, and control and agency by designing and implementing a new housing tenure model. We'll tell you a little bit more about how that question came to be when we walk through the process. But that's kind of where we started with this initiative.
Josh or Emmy, anything to add to that? Around the problem you were trying to solve?
I think Adrienne summed it up well.
I think she did. And Adrienne, we're going to stay with you for this one. You talked about the process. There's a process to this. So you have this problem. You're saying, hey, can we do this? And now you have to figure out how you're going to tackle that. Could you talk a little bit about the process?
Yeah, and this will help people understand a little bit more too about the Solutions Lab approach, I think, that you were talking about earlier, Michael. So when we think of a Solutions Lab, which is really the process that we used in this project, it's a process that first and foremost takes a human-centered approach. So we try as much as possible to keep the people that we're trying to serve at the forefront of all of our conversations and all of the work that we do. The second is that we really try to embrace ambiguity by withholding the urge to quickly get to the answer. And I'm sure Josh will talk about that one a little bit more later, because that was definitely something that was hard for us as a team, for sure, as all of us are working in housing every day. The next is that everyone is an expert in their own domain, and they bring value through their experiences and contributions to the design process. So besides the group of us today, there was actually 8 team members who were all part of the process and brought their own expertise. Our approach is also participatory, so we try as much as possible to bring people in from across the system. So we were super lucky to have folks from York Region, from United Way GTA, from the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, from CHRA, Robbins Appleby, Arborough, Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, Meridian Credit Union, CMHC, NAMI Res. The list kind of goes on, but just wanted to give some shout outs to all the people who spent some time with us on this. And then lastly, we have quite a bias of showing instead of telling. So trying as much as possible to make our ideas tangible and to do that early on in the process. And I would say the other unique feature of the process that we went through was really starting from the lens of what we're calling desirability. So trying to envision what a desirable model or solution would look like for the people that we want to serve. And so again, this really involves avoiding jumping right away to questions like, oh, do we have enough money to do that? Or will this actually work technically? Those are all really important questions, but we keep those until later so that we make sure that we're actually designing something that is serving the people that we're speaking with. So in our first phase, we started with discovery, which meant that we started from a place where we wanted some inspiration and curiosity that we started with, but we didn't want to assume that we had a clear picture of exactly what we were trying to solve and what value and impact we were going to have. And so we went out and spoke with Blue Door and Habitat families and the people that you serve to understand what are the ingredients of traditional home ownership that are really important to them. So we asked them about their hopes for their housing futures. And that led us really to these 3 visions of the future that people gave us that were really important to them. And so those were to provide for their family, to have freedom and life improvement, and to find a home for the long term. And through all those stories of the future that people gave us, we derived 4 key components that we are using as our success criteria for designing our new model. And so those were the ones that you heard in our big challenge question. So how do we create a model that has permanence and stability, that helps people build equity, that gives people a sense of pride and responsibility and control and agency? And so we have big descriptions of what those all mean to people. If you want to read more and read our report, you can read up on what those 4 actually mean. But what those success criteria meant for us was that any model that we came up with had to pass a test of whether it's reasonably delivering those success criteria for people. And so from there, we took a little bit of time to actually disassemble what goes into a typical housing tenure model. So who is the developer, to where does the money come from, to who is eligible to live there and what happens when the family leaves. And we did that for a whole continuum of tenure types that we could think of that exist today, from affordable rental housing to supportive to cooperative or other innovative home ownership models like Arbor or like Habitat home ownership. We wanted to understand what are all the different variables that make those models different. So if you're familiar with, like a business model canvas, for example, where you take apart all of the components of a business model to understand how it works, we were trying to kind of create a similar thing, but for housing tenure models. So what would a housing tenure model canvas look like? And so in doing so, we realized that there's about 25 different variables or differentiators that make up a housing tenure model. And so we took that set of variables and we tried to rebuild a new model that optimized for those 4 success criteria that I named that came from the people. So you can think of this as like playing around with dials on a soundboard and changing all the different components until you find that sweet spot. And that's how we got to Dwell.
Yeah, and you talk about change. I think being a part of this, I know what we kind of started with and what you ended up with was a little different. So Josh, well, let's talk a little bit about that. I think the concept when we first all chatted about it was, hey, there's a lot of people that we serve that sometimes get into rental and they can afford the rental, but if there was some way to help them build some kind of equity around home ownership. So we started with that concept of home ownership. And for anyone who has not, maybe for people who have been living under a rock, home ownership is, we quickly came to the realization that may not work. Can you talk to us a little bit about how we pivoted and changed and how you changed on this project, Josh?
Yeah, sure. So I think first of all, it's really important that when we're trying to answer these challenging questions or solve complex problems like housing affordability, it's really important to let go of the so-called sacred cows and challenge our own thinking, challenge society's thinking on why something doesn't work or does work, or why can't it work or why can't it. And I think it was within that spirit we as a team asked ourselves, why can't someone that is homeless or at risk of becoming homeless become a homeowner? and that's again how we started. We needed to be very subjective and put aside our own individual bias and conventional thinking to kind of come to the answer that we arrived at. And then the question became, what would it look like if someone that is at risk of becoming homeless or is homeless was able to benefit from all the good things that come with owning your own home? How could that change someone's life, provide positive social outcomes? And then we started to just, the conversation got very exciting, and we realized really quickly that no one really cares about the piece of paper that you get when you own a home. It's the qualities, it's the positive outcomes, and that are kind of a consequence of owning a home, such as building equity, building credibility, more food security. And I think those are the things that we started, again, as Adrienne mentioned, to focus on and realize, could we achieve these outcomes through a different tenure like rental or cooperative housing without having to transfer title, there's a cost associated that, at least in Toronto and Ontario, where we have land transfer tax and other things like securing a mortgage. So I think the solution that we've come up with is quite eloquent and still provides the outcomes that people look for when wanting to own a home.
Absolutely. Now, we talked about this was not a 3-week project. We've been at this for about a year and a half. And along the way, I'm sure there's a lot of learnings and surprises. Can you speak, Josh, a little bit to some of the stuff that you might have learned along the way, or some of the surprises that the group had to work through?
Yeah, well, I think maybe the group had to work through dealing with me, which as Adrienne kind of alluded to, I was really keen to, figure out or understand, like, is this going to work? What's the math, or are the financials going to work? So I learned a lot about myself, or reinforced things that maybe I already knew, that I'm impatient, but I can keep a secret. I think, but ultimately the outcome was, it was a really exciting process. Having the team we had was like the secret ingredient to the success. We all had different strengths to bring. There was discussions, I remember, when we were in our boardroom and having a conversation about how would this whole thing would go. And I forget what page it is in the report, but there's this flow chart, or kind of a map of how everything works and all the connections. And we literally drew that out in the boardroom. And that was a really interesting and challenging discussion that I think probably took 2 hours, but ultimately it ended up making the project that much better and a better understanding. And I was happy to see it in the final report.
Yeah, lots of surprises along the way, and it was a perfect mix of a partnership, in my opinion. So you designed Dwell, Adrienne. I think you answered the questions. Like, you hit all those, you ticked off all the boxes, right? Around stability, whatever. We've got a program where people actually might leave after a while with some equity that could be matched. And I know one of the challenges we all talked about is when Josh talked about the math. Every time we do the math, we're like, yeah, that's not enough. And so we kept trying to be creative. How do we get more? How do we do this? We talked about matching. So in the end, you have this great, very, I think, scalable project. So I'm going to ask you a question. Why should people care about Dwell? That's the name of the project. Meaning, what role can it play in helping to end homelessness?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first and foremost, and back to kind of the lessons learned too, is that really reinforced for me is trusting the process. And, we created those 4 success criteria at the beginning, and all throughout the process, we use those to kind of say, hey, if we're going to design it in that way, are we actually creating control and agency? Or are we actually creating pride and responsibility? We always went back to those. So I think why people should care is, I hope that residents, at least, or people in the community who this might benefit, will really see those 4 success criteria shining through in Dwell. So, of course, the first being a direct benefit that they will be able to live in a stable, secure, and affordable housing opportunity with an amazing socially minded landowner and like Blue Door and a great property management team. That they'll have opportunities to build connections and have that sense of pride and responsibility in a model that's kind of similar and borrowing quite a bit from a cooperative housing model. So we took kind of also the best ingredients of a cooperative housing model too. We just kind of borrowed from everything. That people will have supports where they live, and that they, as you said, Michael, will have the opportunity to build equity, and we're putting that in air quotes, over the course of their tenure. So our goal was really for them to be able to cash out a rental rebate of about $10,000 after living at Dwell for about 5 years. So we're trying to mimic the idea of, a homeowner selling their home and taking their equity with them. So really to create another wealth generating opportunity for people who are not traditional homeowners. So I think that's a super a neat and new opportunity in Canada. And beyond the individual family, this model is really trying to infuse our collective commitment to the realization of the right to adequate housing in Canada. And so we're doing so, by offering another option for people. So beyond that binary decision of am I a renter or am I an owner, there's something else in between maybe. Making this opportunity affordable for those in greatest need in Canada. So I think all of us are pretty excited that our modeling actually made it possible for someone to pay $400 a month in rent in one of our scenarios that we came up with. And so that's equivalent to affordability to someone employed at like part-time employed at minimum wage. So it's a pretty good depth of affordability that we've reached. We've offered supports as part of the model. So that's great to be able to maintain your right to housing. And then lastly, I think in terms of this idea of scaling it that Emmy was talking about, we really envision this being connected to a bigger, maybe a nonprofit land trust model. So that would really help kind of shelter the properties from the profit motive and financialization. And so that also allows for affordability in perpetuity and really kind of represents that principle of the right to housing. So I think we're pretty proud of the potential impacts that this could create.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about impact too. I think of, so many people who would say, listen, I'm barely getting by. I can afford my rent geared income. That's it. But after the 5 years, so many people, if something happens in life, I've got a kid going to school, I've got something, my car just broke down, something happened where you need a chunk of equity, or I want to go on a trip. I want to invest in myself. I want to invest in my retirement, those types of things. Before Dwell, not really an option. Dwell kind of provides those opportunities, right, moving forward. So it gives people, and I'd say like beyond the dollar amount, it really provides that hope and that kind of inspiration for people to say, yeah, I am building a little equity. I have skin in the game. This is, I have something to look forward to, which is very, very cool and unique. Emmy, we talked about scaling. Adrienne just mentioned, you mentioned it before. What are the next steps for Dwell? Where do we go from here? You've completed the lab. Now what happens?
Well, I think we're looking at implementation and execution. And so for us, it's really important that this research and this lab work is actioned and that it doesn't sit on a shelf somewhere. So we're determined to pilot this in our programs. Some of the discussions that we're having now is, how can we build out a package that we can share with other nonprofits and charities that can implement this perhaps in existing programs that they have or existing homes that they're using to serve their target demographics. At Blue Door, we're looking at what site can we pilot this on to deliver this important program. We've already sort of structured out the milestones, and they consist of short and long range goals. And we are taking the next steps towards execution, and so that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, you're going to put it into action. We're going to pilot it and say, let's see how this works. And sometimes you have to tweak it a little bit because you find out once you put it into action. Sometimes what's on paper may not translate exactly, right, moving forward. So on that thread, if someone's listening someone from the sector, community wants to get Dwell or try Dwell in their community, or maybe they just want to learn more. Like, I want to learn more about this podcast. It's been great. It's been informative. Can you tell me a little more? Can I see the numbers, etc.? What could they do, Emmy?
You can reach out to any of us, and my email is emmy.k@bluedoor.ca. You can shoot a line, and we'd be happy to share with you our research and findings. It's a pretty comprehensive paper that does show out the performas and all the pieces of the programming. And as I said, we're continuing to build this out as well, and happy to stay in touch and share our learnings so far with you.
Awesome. Yeah, and I encourage people to do so. We are going to pilot this, but if you want to learn more, I think when we talk about innovation across the sector, you don't have to be first to the post, but if someone else is trying this out, and let's face it, we're going to need a lot of creativity and innovation to work through this big challenge we have in a housing crisis. I think Dwell is an important piece of the puzzle. So we're going to go to any final thoughts. We're going to start with you, Josh, then go to Emmy and to Adrienne. Any final thoughts as we come to the close of the podcast?
Yeah, so I think addressing the housing affordability crisis means coming up with new ideas to address the challenges across the housing spectrum. I think, and this may be controversial, I think financialization of housing and the right to housing are not mutually exclusive or kind of don't always necessarily need to be work against each other. And I think that's why, frankly, this new program is exciting. I think it helps demonstrate that there is a potential for positive outcomes from financialization of housing. This program, I think, represents an exciting opportunity to empower people to not only get out of the homelessness cycle, but to actually empowers them to move through the housing continuum, where they can find equity, security, and overall a better quality of life. So I'm excited to see where this goes and next, and the lives that it can change. So thank you again for having us today and for working together as a team over the last year. It's been an exciting process.
And to add, I think the one thing that we learn more and more every day is the importance of collective impact and working together to create that impact. Michael, when you asked, what's the point? I think that anyone listening will know that, we need you. We need you to engage others as well. This model will be made successful by different parties working together. It'll be made successful, for example, if we can get businesses on board, or foundations or others, to match the equity that we're paying out to participants, so that we can help build even greater independence. There's so many possibilities of where this project can go. The more people that take ownership and the more people that get involved. So I want to put in a plug for our collective impact to join our team, partner with us, and help to make change. Additionally, too, one thing we have kept in mind too are the Sustainable Development Goals as we do our work. And this project tackles 1, 3, 10, and 17 very clearly, and touches on a number of others. And it's so important that we continue this important work so that we can get closer to reaching those goals. And on a personal note, I'm so grateful to this team and the whole team that came together on this project. I've learned so much, and loved the days that we spent, even though some of the days were like pulling out our hair to find solutions. We're definitely on to something amazing, and look forward to sharing it with all the listeners as well.
Mm-hmm. And maybe on that note of innovation and teamwork, Emmy, I just feel like there's so much space for innovation and initiatives like this in housing in Canada. It's definitely a difficult problem to be working on, and it can be super discouraging, especially for people who kind of live this day in and day out. A great place to start would be to think about kind of what is that commonly held wisdom that you want to challenge, and try and just imagine a world without that rule or without that assumption, and see where it takes you. And it really takes kind of the trust of the team, and then also trust from the lived experts that we're engaging with, that we're going to kind of take that leap together, and that everyone's ideas are going to be valued, whether you're, the CEO like Michael, or you're an intern that we bring into the project, but that everyone's kind of different ways and approaches of working really helped us get creative. So shout out to Jericho from Blue Door and Christine Lanksey and Lorraine from SHS, who also brought all their personal experience. I'm sure we couldn't have a podcast of 8 people, but and to you, Michael, I know you're hosting us, but you were a big part of this too. So kudos to you as well for all your work.
Dwell is a great and innovative program. I can't wait to see it take off. Blue Door is going to pilot this, but we're looking for support from around the country to say, hey, let's see how we can do this in various different ways. Reach out. Emmy gave her email. It says emmy.k@bluedoor.ca if you want to get involved. And if you want to see, we've been presenting on this at various, I think we presented at AMFA and CHRA. We may end up presenting this at the CEH conference in the future, still to be determined. So it keeps progressing as we learn and grow. So thank you to the 3 of you. Thank you to your organizations for being innovative, for thinking differently, for pushing the boundaries. That's what we need in this sector if we're going to make real change happen. And you're doing exactly that. Really value your time and expertise. Thank you so much. Well, there you have it. Listen, here's what I like. I like a lot about Dwell, and we were involved in that. But really, that question started off with, it was, why the hell not? Quite often, we kind of look at things and this is good enough. Ooh, we got someone into housing. It's truly affordable. Job done. But we kind of pushed ourselves to say, why not? Like, why can't people own a home? Maybe they can't, but why can't they at least build some equity? There's dignity in that. And to do that, along the process, Adrienne touched on it too, we have the voices of lived experts to say, when we think we know something, we bring it out to them and they say, that sounds good, that is realistic, here's kind of how it worked for me. And it's so important, if you're going to design something for a group, make sure they have a voice in it. Dwell did that. You've got the voices of lived experts in there, and it pushes the boundaries. Really, it's about empowering people, as Joshua said, helping them along that journey to get along, right? It provides that hope. A real cool program. It's innovative. This is what happens. Our good friends at CMHC and their Solutions Lab, they're putting funding out there so you can brainstorm and come up with ideas like this. And the reason they're doing that is with the hope that with these great designs, we could share them across the country and we could see a movement happening. And I think Dwell is well on its way to creating a swell in that movement. Great guests. We're so fortunate here on the way home to always have such innovative, cool, and fun guests. And today's guests were no exceptions. Listen, share this podcast with your friends. Share widely. Make a comment. Reach out to me at michael.b@bluedoor.ca if you have ideas or any guests or something you'd like to see, a subject you'd like us to tackle in the area of housing, health, homelessness, healthcare. Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the way home.